I'm 100% with you on that, Tony Marie, because you can get to 80% and be stopped. You've got to be like crystal clear on what you're creating, what you're up to, what your purpose is, what your current mission is. And then you know what your no's will be and you know what your yeses will be. It will be much clearer. And so I love that you do that.
We tend to think that when we hit that resistance or that fear or that challenge, that it means something about us. We make it as part of our identity as opposed to, oh, that's just feedback. Welcome to the Legacy in the Making show. I'm your host, LA's foremost success coach, Tony Marie Torrey. I interview leaders and influencers who've gone beyond the superficial markers of success and claimed true fulfillment by leveraging their positions to create positive and profitable changes in their businesses and beyond. They share their stories and offer real-world, boots-on-the-ground experience that translates into practical advice to apply to your own journey. I invite you to this injection of wisdom and inspiration so you can prevail and leave your own lasting legacy. Well, hello, I'm Tony Marie Torrey, and I'm here today with the Legacy in the Making show, and we will be talking to Robin Quinn Keehn. Robin is an amazing woman who has created this movement. She's the founder of what we call the quitting culture. And she helps entrepreneurs and business owners get clear on their accountability and, quote unquote, quit on unnecessary commitments, promises, and agreements so they can develop the mindset of finishing strong and taking intentional action to meet their personal goals. A former music and dance studio owner, mom of 4 kids, and a business coach, Robin understands the massive impact unintentional quitting has on both children and adults, and how it impacts their confidence, their self-esteem, and their results. And so, Robin, welcome. So happy to have you here. Can we get started with you telling us a little bit about your backstory and how it is that you came to set up the quitting culture?
Sure. And thank you for the beautiful welcome, Tony Marie. It was lovely. The backstory really is, and I was thinking about this earlier, I'll make it as brief as I can because it could be a long story, but when I was a little girl, I was raised by parents who were both quite type A. They were both teachers, but my dad was an airline pilot. And my mom and dad just had a very strong commitment to my brother and I finishing whatever we started. So my prime example is when I was really little, they noticed that I could play the piano. And so when I was 4, they put me in Suzuki violin. I know that's not piano, but it was the right thing to do, right? As a little tiny girl. And I played violin until I was 10. And then when I was 10, they said, you have a choice. Do you want to continue with violin lessons or would you like the piano? And then I said, piano, of course. And I never had an opportunity to quit. My mom and dad knew me. They knew how excited I was. And so even on the days where I didn't want to go and I was unhappy, and the years in high school where I was like, I have more important things to do. Like you can imagine what teenage girls have to do. Lots of important things. They still didn't let me quit. They said, no, you're going to complete piano lessons. And actually, I took piano all the way through college. So that was my experience of growing up. It was just when you were committed, you completed the commitment. Then I had kids. And the first one had a big fit one day going to preschool when she was barely 4. And I thought, that's weird. And it kept going on, this pattern of being, happy when she was there, but very unhappy on the way. And I finally spoke to her teacher and I said, what's this about? She's a little tiny girl and yet she's got me in tears every morning. And she said to me, I want you to answer 2 questions. Number 1, is she safe? And number 2, do you value this activity? And I said, 100%. She said, then you're the one that gets to decide if this is the right place for her to be. You choose, not her. She's a little tiny girl. So fast forward to having a music and dance studio with 500 students. And now it gets to be amplified for me, right? I've kind of dialed it in with my kids. I understand, but now I'm watching all these parents go through the same excruciating experience. I have to say it. It's embarrassing. It's humbling. It's humiliating. It's all of those things when your kid is in a lesson and suddenly decides they don't want to be there anymore. And they pitch a big fit, right? And then the mom comes to the desk and says, we're gonna drop out. And at our studio, you had to fill out a form. So I remember one day a mom was standing there, a very tall blonde mom. I couldn't even see her child. And she came to the desk and said, we're going to drop out. And Sarah at the desk said, okay, great, fill out this form. Can you tell me a little bit more? And she said, well, she just doesn't like it anymore. I think she's bored. And I peeked around that mom and I saw this little itty bitty 3-year-old. And I thought, oh my goodness, we are in so much trouble when 3-year-olds call the shots.
Mm-hmm.
So about a year and a half ago, I launched a program called Raising Quit-Proof Kids. And the goal of that program is to work with businesses that serve kids and help them improve their retention, their reputation, their revenue, and the results for the students. And it's through this teaching parents of what their responsibility is in making these kinds of decisions and what happens when your kid is unhappy. How much of it is on you and how much of it is just kind of a test and an emotion. And when you learn to recognize, because you're present with your child, when you learn to recognize that everything we do when it's a long-term relationship has peaks and valleys and plateaus, everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's nothing wrong. This is the human experience. So I began getting that program out there. And every time I would talk on a show, radio show or whatever, the host would always say, this is not just about kids. We all have this problem. Can you do something for us?
True. I do have to say, I'm extremely grateful from a parenting perspective. I can totally relate to the challenge that you're talking about. And I was advised to get a book that I think it's out of print now. It was like from the 70s when my daughter was 2 and we were starting to get into the terrible twos. And the book was called Back in Control.
Oh.
And it's a very powerful book because it really, what essentially it taught, and it was geared towards dealing with unruly teenagers, but apparently developmentally there are some similarities between age 2 and the teen years. And that totally makes sense. Their identity is starting to shift and they're starting to exercise their own will muscles. The full concept of the book was about follow through. Mm-hmm. Essentially just follow through. And yes, and you're the adult and you know, so long as, I love that question that you were saying before, like, is she safe? And is this something that you value for your child? Mm-hmm. They're really great questions.
I've got 4 kids and there's a 10-year spread. So we always talked about puberty and preschool. They were happening at the same time. So we've laughed about that a lot. Like, remember that? That was really tricky. Both the same behaviors, just 10 years apart. Yeah, it is just the natural course to be happy, to be unhappy, to be okay. And it happens in school, in jobs, in careers, in marriages, mm-hmm. in raising children. I mean, we experience this all the time. What happens, I think, with adults, though, is a little bit different because mm-hmm. somebody's not enrolling them in an activity for their own good. They're putting their hand up and saying, I'll do that thing, right? Uh-huh. But what happens to a lot of adults, we say yes to things, and we say yes out of guilt, out of confusion, out of pressure, out of many reasons, but not necessarily because it's the best thing for us. They also take you away from what you really know in your heart is most important for you to be doing. And that could be anything, whatever it is.
Yeah. So I think a lot of that comes down to decision making and clarity of purpose. Right? It's like,
there you go.
Yeah.
Totally.
It's one of the reasons why that's foundational work I do with my clients, because it helps you with all your decisions and prioritizations and deciding what you're going to stick to and what you're going to quit.
Right. I'm 100% with you on that, Tony Marie, because you can get to 80% and be stopped. You've got to be like crystal clear on what you're creating, what you're up to, what your purpose is, what your current mission is. I talk about those things with my clients too. And then you know what your no's will be and you know what your yeses will be. It will be much clearer. And so I love that you do that. And I love to do that with my clients as well.
Yeah. I think something else that people don't really understand is the hero's journey. Reading Joseph Campbell recently, and the hero's journey is full of peaks and valleys, and we hear the call and then we resist the call, and then we go on this journey. The hope is that your valleys get smaller and you make your way progressively upwards. But we tend to think that when we hit that resistance or that fear or that challenge, that it means something about us. We make it as part of our identity, as opposed to, oh, that's just feedback.
Right.
Yeah, I was listening to Tom Bilyeu recently, and he was talking about how artificial intelligence, actually, they don't consider things to be mistakes. They call them samples. Right. So whenever the AI kind of comes up against any sort of roadblock or whatever, it's just a sample and there's no judgment on it, basically.
Right. In music, we would call that a new arrangement or an improvisation.
Yes, exactly. So this is really interesting. This is part of how your music background helps you now as a business coach. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of things about music that tie into the journey of any entrepreneur, learning how to stick with it when it's hard, learning how to improvise, learning how to be creative. I mean, that's a lot of, for me anyway, a lot of music making is around creativity. And I think that's an asset that we all need to really hone and appreciate, because when you are creative, you can see the opportunities you couldn't have seen before. And you can make different decisions because you know how to look at things and see the possibility. So I call myself a possibilitarian, and I love that. And it's just,
I love that too. I think I might be a possibilitarian as well.
Yeah, it's just such a great way to live, to just see, wow, I don't have to follow a prescribed route to where I'm going. I can pick and choose in the moment and follow my intuition and my creativity. And so I love that about music. Yeah. So one of the things that I want to touch on, because it's so important to me, is now we're in a situation, we'll just pretend we've got an entrepreneur in front of us who is not getting the results they want. Maybe they don't have clarity. So number one, we have to help them with clarity. But once we've done that, now they've got this pile of stuff that they're committed to. And this is probably my biggest aha in the last 5 or 6 years, is that there's a way to end things well. There's a way to cause a lot of damage, which is unaccountable quitting, slipping away in the night, getting as low as you can, stealth mode, getting out of the room. And that really causes a lot of damage to our personal self-esteem and self-worth and our confidence. And it causes damage, of course, to other people that are involved in I call them either unintentional quits or the slip away kind of quitting. I'd love to tell you a little bit about that if you'd like to hear more.
Yes, please do tell us more.
Okay, great. Yeah, because it's so absolutely freeing when you get it and when you learn how to practice it. After we get through the clarity part, because that's so critical. But now we're at the part where it's like, okay, well, I've got all these things. And I have them start with just one area of their life. If they started with their whole life, it just becomes completely overwhelming. So one or two areas, one is good. But just give yourself some time to sit and think about, what are the outstanding commitments, promises, and agreements that you have right now? And I'm not talking about the current ones necessarily and only. I'm talking about anything, because we keep things that we never completed. They live as incomplete in our brains. They are just there. They're incomplete. And I had a situation a couple of years ago where I remembered that I hadn't called this woman who'd been my secretary when I was out of graduate school. I worked for Metro Transit, and I was 25 and I had a secretary. It was pretty cool. And she and I remained friends all these years later, and I had not called her. I'd not gotten through. I tried to call her, but her answering machine on her phone or whatever, she's like 80 or whatever. So whatever wasn't set up. So I dropped the ball. I stopped trying. I didn't call her back. And I was asleep a couple of years ago in the middle of the night, and boom, there it was. You didn't call Karen back. And your brain just stores these things as you didn't do it. You didn't finish it. So when I ask people to look at commitments, promises, and agreements, I ask them to go back to anything that pops into their head, because if it's in their head, and it's
Yep.
incomplete in
Yeah,
their
they're
brain.
all just little energetic hooks that drain us. I was having a conversation with a woman called Organized Audrey recently, and the conversation started because I'd seen her speaking, and she was talking about clutter just being deferred decisions. And I'm like, I have to
Oh,
interview this woman on my podcast because, one of the things that I specialize in is helping people get past decision fatigue and creating decisions from that really, that deeper guidance that allows them to create amazing possibilities for themselves and the world. What you're talking about is exactly that. Like, it's creating decision fatigue, and it's decision fatigue that we're not even like aware of because, like you said, sometimes it's so far back. It's from years ago. All those
yes.
incompletes can be really exhausting.
They can, and we don't even know it. And we don't even
Right?
realize that we're doing something, we're focused, and all of a sudden our brain goes off in another direction. We're like, okay, well, I got to get back to this. But that's a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
So I invite people to really think about, and it can take a few days. I mean, you don't just sit down and write them all out. Once you've asked that of your brain, it will just start showing you these things that are
Mm-hmm.
spinning around. Like, I didn't help somebody move when I said I would. I dropped the ball on, taking somebody to the doctor, whatever, these things that we've done. And then the opportunities go back and clean that up.
Mm.
So when we've broken promises with ourselves, that's a particular way of letting that go. So I'll give you an
Mm.
example. Back in September, I stopped eating sugar. And I've done this a number of times through my life. Sometimes it'll last, 3 years, and sometimes it'll last 2 days. But I was really on a good track with it. I was September all the way through March 13th. And March 13th, I was in Canada for a big event, landed, and 2 hours later, they said, go home.
Mm.
And I had my youngest daughter with me who was graduating from high school, and we had to turn around and go home. But before we did, we went shopping and we bought all kinds of junk. It was like, we have to stay overnight. Let's just have fun. And so I found myself, deep into a bag of caramel M&Ms. And I was like, wow, I guess we're done with that. So I could have beat myself up over that. I could have shamed myself and said, oh my gosh, you were on a beautiful path and you just screwed it up. And now you're eating M&Ms and look at you.
It becomes a should, which is a shaming activity. Yeah. And shame is
It
so
totally is.
debilitating.
Oh, it is. And if we follow that out, I'll go back to what I do, but if you follow shame out, I believe that shame leads to lack of confidence, but it also leads to isolation. And God knows none of us need more isolation right now. But
Not now.
isolation and eventually hiding and depression. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not healthy. It's not
Yeah.
a healthy thing. So when I've done something that is out of alignment with what I said I wanted, I let myself off the hook. I literally let
Mm-hmm.
myself off the hook. So what I did back there in March was I said, look at you eating M&Ms. That's interesting. I guess you made a new decision. All right. Okay. Well, you can keep that decision for as long as you want. You're off the hook. End of
Nice.
conversation. I've not felt
Oh,
guilty. I've not felt, yeah.
that's really nice. I love it. Self-love right there. It's all those
And
voices in our head that are so harsh on ourselves. And a lot of the work I do is
yeah,
about helping people shift those voices in their heads that oftentimes aren't even their own
right.
voices, oftentimes parents and teachers and siblings and, all the stuff that comes from earlier on. And it's not even their
Yes.
idea.
It's very good to be kind to yourself that way. When we break promises with ourselves, there's a lot of damage that happens. Where it really starts is negative self-talk, which I started. I gave an example when I ate the M&Ms, right? Oh my gosh, can you believe it? I can't, you know better than that. So there's the negative self-talk, but there's a lot of confusion too, because when we're out of alignment, we are confused. So there's confusion that comes up.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the
Yeah.
isolation, the embarrassment.
Yeah. It's the cognitive dissonance
Mm-hmm.
that happens. That's like the, technical term for it, which essentially means conflict
Mm-hmm.
within ourselves, within our brains, within our psyches. And it's very
Yes,
disempowering stuff.
it is. And can you imagine that most of us run around with that going on
Mm-hmm.
because we constantly break micro commitments to ourselves. We say we're getting up at 7:20, we're out of bed. even that, if we said, I'm getting up at 7 because I've got these things to do, or it's my time to meditate or whatever, we've broken a promise to ourselves and we're out of integrity. We're out of alignment. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. We just need to know how to clean that up.
I was thinking about something that Tony Robbins said that had a profound impact in my life, which is that the people with the least amount of rules are the happiest. And I realize now that I think really what he was saying was the people with the least amount of shoulds are the happiness. Yeah. So, like, everyone should do this. My spouse should be this way, right? Like, they're the kind of rules that we have in our heads for other people and for ourselves. That's the shaming and blaming stuff. What you're talking about here is like, so once you've, if you've broken your rule, how can you be kind to yourself and others?
Right. And let yourself off the hook. Absolutely. And then there are the rules or the things that we've done with other people where we've let them down because we've broken a commitment, promise, or agreement. And those are the ones where, as much as we feel the internal ones, those are external and they have a different kind of impact on us. So if there's a way to clean that up with someone, and I went back to Karen, my secretary, and I spoke to her about it. And how I did it was I said, Karen, I'm so sorry. I realized that I've broken a commitment to you. I said I would call you. And in fact, I didn't call you. I didn't tell her her phone was off the hook or whatever. I just said I didn't call you. Then it would be me making an excuse, but I tried. So no, I did not call you. I did not speak to you. And so I want to tell you that I'm really sorry that I broke that commitment that I had to you. And the impact it's had on me, and those are important words, the impact it's had on me is that I've been really embarrassed and I've kind of hidden from you. I've hidden from you. And I want to know if there's a way that we can clean this up between us so that we both experience it as a new agreement and a win-win for both of us. So how can we do that? The magic words are the impact it's had on me. To me, those are the magic words. Yeah.
That's such amazing truth telling there. And the other thing that I love about what you just said is it reminded me of something that I used to say, as my family was growing, including my husband who needed to grow, needed to grow up. He was kind of a big kid. And my daughter, as she was growing up, and I used to say, like, sorry doesn't mean anything unless it's backed up with a commitment to change.
Yes.
And really, so that conversation that includes the realization of the impact that it's had on you, that seems to me that would be like a natural motivator to change. And then you can come up with a new agreement in a way that feels honest and fair for both parties. So I love that process. Do you mind just reviewing that? Can you kind of break that down into a formula of steps for us? Because I think it's so much easier for people the dialogue's fabulous. And then just if we can kind of have those nuggets, I'm sure that would be a great takeaway for the Legacy and the Making Show audience.
Yeah. So let's just say that you recognize that you have broken a commitment, promise, or agreement in the past, long way back, or more recent. I like to sit down and kind of sketch this out for myself before I go talk to somebody, because I want it to be authentic and I want it to be heartfelt. And I don't want to be caught up in any emotion in the moment. I don't want to get pulled into the emotion. I had a situation a couple of years ago where I spoke to someone very, very directly. And it took a lot of courage on my part. And it was a beautiful, really redemptive kind of conversation. But I spent time ahead of time getting clean and clear about my part in things. And so I would encourage anyone to sit with it for a little while. Don't just go running on jumping on the phone and apologizing to a bunch of people. Actually think about it. What would you like to create from it? So think about that first. Think about what was your part in it, which for me with Karen was I simply did not speak with her. So my part was I didn't talk to her on the phone. So I went to her and said, I'm sorry. I am out of integrity with you because I broke a commitment to you. So I told her where I was in myself out of integrity. Why? Because I broke a commitment or a promise to her. And the impact it's had on me is I'm embarrassed. I'm hiding. I hate to even call her right now because I'm so embarrassed. That's the impact it's had on me. And then the request, can we work this out? Will you forgive me? You can say that. You can ask, will you forgive me? And sometimes people are very shocked by that. You could say, will you forgive me for not calling you, if you want to get specific? And then usually the person will say, yes, of course. I don't know. I haven't had many people say, no, I won't. Maybe one or two. And then it's like, let's have another conversation later. Let's just stop right there. Or the next step is, I'd like to clean this up with you. How can we create a win-win? So a win-win with Karen and I was, hey, Robin, don't feel like you need to call. If I hear from you twice a year, that would be really lovely. That was our agreement. So I actually spoke to her on Wednesday.
Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic.
And she doesn't call me then. And that's part of the agreement. She's like, I don't want to call you. I feel like you're busy. So it becomes, so now I could have said, no, that's not a win-win because it feels like it's one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like you need to be able to share what feels like a win. You're not there, groveling for forgiveness. You're saying, this is the impact. I don't like that. I want to clean it up. I want to create a win-win and then work towards a win-win. Have a conversation.
And it sounds like sometimes a possibility could actually be a completion of the relationship in some way, shape, or form. Like if you can't get to that sense where it feels like everyone's needs are being met, then maybe it's just a way of clarifying that. So the relationship is no longer an energetic hook on your brain as well, because that can be very draining for people too.
Right. Absolutely. I agree.
Relationships.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's an opportunity. I think it just feels like such a relief when you've cleaned this stuff up. There's, like you're talking about the energetic hooks, it just doesn't trigger you anymore. That person's name, like Karen's name, and I have a friend, my best friend is named Karen, for heaven's sake. So I can't stay away from Karen.
I can't get away from it.
No. So to just not have that be a thing, it just goes, her name now just goes right over the top of me without any, feeling like those hooks that you're talking about.
The people listening to this podcast, the legacy makers, it's so important that we make sure that emotionally, psychically, energetically, where we have as many of our reserves available to do the good and important work that we're doing in the world and to be the change makers and to address some of the world's most difficult problems. And so all this work, like it might sound like kind of soft skills or nice to haves, but really it's an integral part of making sure that you have the energy and the power to go out there and be the change maker that you were born to be. And a lot of what I oftentimes work with CEOs and even some of the celebrities that I've worked with and things is that they come to me and they're dealing with burnout. And a huge aspect of burnout is exactly these kind of incompletes that you're talking about right now, and the ways in which they have all these kind of mental shoulds that they beat themselves up about. And I mean, there are other aspects of it as well, but in the context of this conversation, it just really reminds me how important it is for us to free ourselves up in this way.
Well, and that's kind of the whole point for me is I don't want to be sucked into the upset when I've got something hanging and suddenly I'm triggered again and now I'm off my game and I'm not as present with my kids or with somebody else. That's a big part of it too. It's just the being present and being kind of undistractable. Indistractable?
Both. Indestructibly undistractable. How about that? Yeah. And all the brain science now shows that it takes you 20 minutes to get back into focus when you've been distracted. Yes. And that is not just someone ringing the doorbell. No. Right? It is the distractions that we create within ourselves, within our own minds. And so the more you can create this peace of mind, really, that seems to me to be a natural result of what you're talking about. The more focused we can be and the less distractible.
Absolutely. And I mentioned earlier about the practice of this, and it really is a practice because we do still get sucked in, even though we're on purpose and we know what we're doing. It is still easy for somebody to come to us and say, "Can you please?" And you're like, "Oh, sure. I did it this last week. I looked at my calendar for this week and said, oh my goodness, I got sucked in. Just, I could do that. And I'm overcommitted." So I actually was noticing that earlier today. And I went, I need to go back to 3 people and say, this isn't going to work for me. I've created something that is out of control this week. And so I'd like to clean that up with you. Before I break my promise, I'd like to find out if there's a way that we can renegotiate so that it feels like a win-win and I'm still in integrity. So it's vigilance. It's vigilance because it happens all the time.
Well, and what you're doing there is you're making a deposit into trust accounts too. Trust is like having a bank account, and especially in relationships and things. Oftentimes, very busy entrepreneurs break promises to some of the most important people in their lives, and it's just like, you've got this account. Are you going to make a withdrawal or a deposit? And so your process at least becomes like maybe a neutral transaction. At least you're not making withdrawals, and you're probably making deposits because you're showing integrity and consideration of other people's times, and that time and that, of course, is our most precious resource.
Yes, absolutely. It is. Truly is.
Robin, this has been so helpful. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we wind up and say goodbye to our beautiful audience?
Only that by doing this, learning how to do this and doing it consistently, your impact grows, your confidence really grows. You get to finish the things that are important to you because you said so, right? I'm going to finish these things that are important. I'm not finishing all those other things that aren't important. And for me, there's just the sense of freedom and liberation to be my best, enjoy the time that I have, and spend it wisely.
Ultimately, when we hopefully go careering into the end of our days going, wow, what an amazing ride.
Yes.
Really what it comes down to is, how do we feel about ourselves? That's what we're going to be dealing with at the end of our days, is how do we feel about the person that we became during the course of our evolution. And this is a great way for making sure that you feel good about yourself and your word keeping and exercising your will body.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Toni Marie. I enjoyed
Robin,
with you and talking to your audience, and I hope that there are some takeaways that people will actually use and find more freedom and more purposeful action.
All right, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Legacy in the Making show, and we'll catch you next time. I'm glad you tuned in to the Legacy in the Making show. If you're genuinely interested in creating positive change in your business or your life, or on a more global scale, I invite you to connect with me at tonimarie.com. That's Toni with a Y, Marie with 2 E's. When you get there, you'll find the Path to Purpose Master Plan, the truly brilliant method to make sure you're clear on why you're here. This is the absolute critical foundation to honing your instincts and leaving a legacy you'll be proud of. You can also find out about the Innate Wisdom Business Council, which is an opportunity to evolve your vision in the company of like-minded leaders, and much, much more. Thanks for listening. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll see you next time.